So John Roberts, Supreme Court Justice, he has a duty as a Supreme Court Justice and as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to uphold the Constitution, to defend it against enemies, foreign and domestic. He also has a Christian duty to stop rogue judges. So how can you connect the two? Do you want to start in the so-called secular? We can start there if you like, but I would just remind you of something. There's no such thing as secular. Secular means that this is the part of the world that God doesn't control or doesn't care about. He made the whole thing. He has given us the ability to be managers here. We are not owners of the world. We don't even own our own lives or our own bodies. He's given us the ability, the privilege of stewarding these things. But if you want to play the secular game, let's do that for a second. Then let's talk about the Christian duty as we go through some ways that I think President Trump is trying to right things. If you look at federal district court judges, there are 677 permanent Article III district court judgeships in the United States. And that's just one class of these judges. There's also 94 federal judicial districts in the United States, covering the 50 states, but 677 seats. What's the name of them again? No, I know they're federal courts, but what kind of court? District courts. Why did our founders take the time to call them district courts instead of all national courts? Well, they can't all be national. There's 677 of them, but they all are. They're all national courts. Anytime a judge decides that they want to drop a national decision or a national injunction, boom, they're done. But they're district courts. No, they're not. They're national. They have more control over the executive branch of government than the president does. More control. Article 2, Section 5 of the United States Constitution says that the power of the executive resides in a president. These guys are 677 other presidents who have veto power over what the president does, the actual elected president. Oh, but don't worry, the Supreme Court will decide these things. Oh, I see. So the judiciary at a district court level stops the executive from taking executive branch actions simply within the executive branch, not to do with the legislative branch, not to do with judicial. And any of these 677 presidents can stop it, and then the other presidents in the Supreme Court can step in and say, we're not going to let you do that with the executive branch. So, question. Does the president get to go to the Supreme Court justice and say, you know what, I need you to fire these court clerks because I think these are the guys who leaked the Dobbs decision. Fire them. How would Justice Roberts respond if President Trump issued an executive order saying, fire any of the clerks of the court who were there during the Dobbs decision leak because one of them leaked it? Justice Roberts would refuse. This is something only for the judicial. This is an interjudicial issue. And yet, Roberts allows these district court judges to play at being presidents. Now, President Trump is doing things that are not extraordinary. Oh, there are some extraordinary things, but many of it is not extraordinary. And the Mockingbird media playing into this and trying to help Roberts with cover, because that's part of what they're trying to do, is so very obvious. Let's go through two things here in a second. First of all, the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, with whom I am unbelievably unimpressed, always have been. I didn't want her in that job because of her stance on lockdowns, etc., her stance on red flag laws, and yet she's there. And a CBS story from 2003 to prove that President Trump's not doing anything here that hasn't been talked about, hasn't been explored, and it's not just Barack Hussein Obama starting a Department of Government Efficiency pretending that Joe Biden was going to do something about it. So I'll show you these cases, and then I want to get into why Roberts has a Christian duty to stop these rogue judges and how he has the tools to do this. Get to this in just a second. As we address corruption, and that's what we're talking about. Tomorrow, that is, I don't know when you're watching this, but on the 20th of March, 2025 at 3:30 Pacific, my friend Zach Abraham, Chief Investment Officer, Bulwark Capital Management, is putting on a free live webinar about the first 100 days of President Trump's second administration, and a long-term outlook for 2025. So he's a chief financial officer, or probably chief investment officer. So what makes him different? This. He's been telling the truth about our financial system for 20 years. He's been warning about inflation for 20 years, about corruption for 20 years, about the way that our stock market has become unconnected to the material profit and loss realities of companies. He's been warning us, and he's been successful at guiding people to successful retirements, which to him means knowing exactly how much money you're going to have every single month when you retire. So join him for this free live webinar. If you're 5, 10, 15 years from retirement, you can't afford to miss this. It is free, but you have to register to attend. So go to knowyourriskradio.com. That's KNOW, knowyourriskradio.com. Investment advisory services offered through Trek Financial LLC and SEC registered investment advisor. Investments involve risk and are not guaranteed. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Trek 25-137. President Trump is not doing things that are horribly extraordinary, because I think part of Roberts' excuse, John Roberts, who has a Christian duty to stop these rogue judges, if he has a mental excuse, I think it's because, well, but President Trump's so far outside the norm. Here is Attorney General Pam Bondi now kind of saying she's going to do some things.
We're here today because we have filed charges against the state of New York. We have filed charges against Kathy Hochul. We have filed charges against Letitia James and Mark Schroeder, who is with DMV. This is a new DOJ, and we are taking steps to protect Americans. New York has chosen to prioritize illegal aliens over American citizens. It stops today. As you know, we sued Illinois, and New York didn't listen. So now you're next. Millions of illegal aliens with violent records have flooded into our communities, bringing violence and deadly drugs with them.
The extraordinary thing she's doing here is she's taking federal power, federal supremacy into the states, saying the federal government runs immigration policy, not you. That's the Constitution makes that clear. You are harboring criminals. And as the chief, well, President Trump has thought of as the chief law enforcement officer. I don't think that's right. I know it's described that way. She, at the Department of Justice, as the Attorney General, is our nation's, well, lawyer. And our nation's lawyer is going after a state. This is not extraordinary. But if you look at this from a Roberts perspective, wait a minute, they're going to go in and actually call out the fact that this is purposeful? Well, we can't have that. President Trump is trying to cut back on a bureaucracy that is so top-heavy with people that we are structurally bankrupt. Please think about the phrase structurally bankrupt. It means that our entire foundation is bankrupt. We are not a nation that has money to give to anybody. And sadly, one of the biggest ways that you can cut government spending is through cutting people, often people who are not working. Not in any real sense. This is extraordinary, an extraordinary claim to make. CBS ran a story in 2003 about a guy working for the government who wasn't working at all for about 7 years at $100,000 per year.
This government worker goes to the office every day.
There's nothing to do. There's nothing to pretend to do.
Though Edward McSwegan once managed a large portfolio of research at the National Institutes of Health, NIH, his work days have been pretty much empty since
March 1996.
It's not that he doesn't want to work. He says they won't let him. Meantime, taxpayers are covering his generous paycheck.
How much do you get paid to do nothing?
About $100,000 a year.
Now, God bless this man for stepping up and admitting it, and for CBS for running the story. We had 156-year-old people cashing Social Security checks. We had 9-year-olds getting millions of dollars in COVID relief funds. This is not extraordinary to stop fraudulent spending. So Justice Roberts has the ability to stop these rogue district judges who are either district judges or they're national judges. Roberts needs to decide. As a Christian man, as he contends to be, he serves a God who is a God of law and order, not chaos. He took a pledge to God to not employ or push chaos. Constitution is anti-chaos. He has a duty to inflict humility upon these district court judges. Jesus himself was humble, even up to the point of the cross, which is a humility, again, I don't think any of us could bear. As a guy who serves a humble God, the humble God, Roberts has the requirement to himself humbly serve and to understand that the full authority of our country is the Constitution, not him. He has to do this, and he has the tools to do this. Time magazine ran a fascinating article about a collision of forces within the judiciary. It reads, for exactly 6 hours and 10 minutes one day last week, this was several years ago, a long, long time ago, Associate Justice William O. Douglas of the U.S. Supreme Court outlawed the American bombing of Cambodia, back in Vietnam War time, clearly. This was not quite long enough to stop the actual bombing, of course, nor was Douglas' actions much of a legal landmark, since it was overturned later the same day by one of his colleagues with the backing of other members of the Supreme Court. Nonetheless, it was the latest and certainly the oddest of a growing number of battles between the Nixon administration and both the legislative and judicial branches of the federal government, the most historic of which was over Nixon's tapes and documents. Douglas agreed to hold a hearing. He was asked to stop this bombing in Cambodia by an anti-war group, and the article says he agreed to hold a hearing the next day in Yakima. That's out in the separate country of Washington, where he had a place. There in a musty courtroom, he listened to the arguments by the ACLU, remember them, and two hastily summoned government lawyers. When Dean Smith, the U.S. attorney from Spokane, asserted that the August 15 cutoff date had been aimed at averting a confrontation between the president and Congress, Douglas replied, "We live in a world of confrontation. That's what the whole system is about." The hearing over, he retired to write an opinion, which was released at 9:30 the following morning by the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., treating the matter as a capital case since it involved the lives of American airmen as well as Cambodian peasants. Douglas wrote, "I do what I think any judge would do in a capital case, vacate the stay entered by the appeals court." Only 10 minutes after the decision was released, Deputy Solicitor General Daniel Friedman entered the court and handed the clerk the government's request for a new stay order. Chief Justice Warren Burger suggested that Justice Marshall, who supervises the 2nd District, should handle the matter and began sending out other members of the High Court on the issue. Marshall reached the court by 11 a.m. Some 4 hours later, after conferring by telephone with other justices, Marshall issued an order that permitted the bombing to continue. In effect, the justices informally voted 8-1 to bring an end to the Douglas bombing pause. They decided on technical grounds, avoiding the ponderous constitutional issue. So they let the president lead the military, the executive branch. Newt Gingrich has made comment about this situation. Those upset by the emerging dictatorship of the district court justices behaving as though they were president should read the Judiciary Act of 1802. Jefferson and his party completely revised the court system and abolished a series of Federalist judges they deemed illegitimate, a warning to the current out-of-control court. President Trump right now has the highest approval rating he's ever had. Justice Roberts, if I could meet with you one-to-one, I would tell you this. We see you. You're a coward. Make a decision. You are the constitutional crisis, and you are failing an oath you made to God Almighty.